Nico, how's it going?
Hey, I'm Miguel. Very well. Really happy to finally be here.
Well, we've wanted to do a podcast like this for a long time to talk about B2B, about B2B marketing, which is what we're passionate about and have loved for a long time.
Basically, our primary goal is to completely unravel all of these B2B terms.
Yes, basically to talk about our strategies, tactics, and methodologies that we've used with business to business clients globally. But anyway, what's the topic going to be today, Nico?
We're going to start by talking about two terms that often cause confusion. The first is demand generation, and the other is lead generation or lead capture, also known as demand capture. So that's the confusion we're going to address.
There are many terms that sometimes mean the same thing
And
that can sometimes create confusion in our tactics and strategies. But anyway, I have a suggestion, Nico. How about we talk to an expert from the agency and ask them about these two terms to see what they can tell us?
sounds good to me. And who should we call?
I'm not really sure, so let's go ahead and call Juta. I think he has all the necessary experience to tell us a little bit more about this.
Topic.
Hey there, friend. Hi, Nico. Well, lead generation versus lead capture. I would explain it like this. Let's imagine we have a company that sells office furniture. What would we need to do to make people want to come to our store? Basically, create a catalog that is attractive and visually appealing, but in addition to that, we would need to generate content. Content, for example, that says, these are the best pieces of furniture according to your room, your living room. Or simply a video blog where we say, look, our furniture is ergonomic, comfortable, and the best according to your needs. What would we be doing there? We would be touching on our potential clients' pain points and at the same time offering them the solution. That's where the other side of the coin comes in, which is lead capture. What would we need to do? Basically, create valuable content. For example, a PDF that lists the top 10 design trends, or simply offer a free 10-minute consultation to help you decorate your new space. Do you want it? Just fill out this form and we'll get back to you. So what would we do with that information? We could pass it on to the sales team for follow-up, or we could simply do email marketing. In conclusion, we create valuable content to capture data. That's basically how I would explain lead generation versus lead capture. Great session. See you in the next episode. Bye.
Well, I think Joe's explanation is pretty easy to understand, right? The example with the modeling clay is really cool. I think this can help Nico introduce us to this topic. Okay, so let's start by really deconstructing, so to speak, this topic of the important concepts of lead generation and demand generation in a little more detail. What are your thoughts on that?
My quick explanation would be to consistently associate the concept of demand generation with the top of the marketing funnel, and then demand capture, or what is also known as lead generation, with the middle part of the funnel. That's how I would sum it up.
All right, Nico, let's go back to that top of the funnel. What are we going to have at the top of the funnel? So basically, what would this furniture company be doing at this stage, Nico? What would they be doing? If you were the furniture company, what would you be doing in this generation? We're talking about demand generation.
Yes, for example, you could launch a podcast about the benefits of ergonomics at work. You could publish SEO articles that rank on Google about this topic without explicitly selling. What you're doing is creating a need,
Basically, you're generating that need.
right? Well, I think that more than generating the need, what you're really doing is allowing the audience to discover a need. In B2B,
Let's say there can be two types of people. Those who have already discovered that need and those who are just now realizing it. And I think this furniture company is showing its value proposition. But that part, let's say, where I say this is my value proposition, at what stage of the funnel would that go?
I think it goes throughout the entire funnel. Because if I create a podcast and I write some blog articles, everything has to be infused with what your brand is about. Your unique value proposition is part of your brand's expression. So from the moment the brand exists and in everything the brand does, if your value proposition isn't present, I think there's a thematic flaw.
Okay. And I think that after this top of the funnel, then comes the middle of the funnel, which is basically when interest in the brand is generated, maybe a bit more towards the product, right? So here we start talking about the features, about the characteristics of this product, so that the user says, okay, I already have the need. We've already generated demand, right? We're in the middle of the funnel. And that's when we start to get into the topic of, hey, I'm interested in this product, right?
Just to give you some detail, the funnel isn't new. It dates back to the 19th century. These aren't new ideas from the 2000s. And there are 4 stages. We're talking about the ADA model. The ADA model starts with awareness, which is attention, then interest, and then desire. So there can't be interest if you don't have attention, and there can't be desire if you don't have interest. And there you're basically realizing a need, you have a pain point. And that's where demand generation in my opinion, has to kind of press on that pain point to push you further down the funnel where you finally reach the action, which for us,
Stop. For me, at that point, let's say that's already the lowest part of the funnel, and I agree that's the action stage. After generating demand, two things can happen. First, the user comes to you on their own because you have become the reference point. We say you become the category leader.
you're top of mind for them.
Exactly, because you've already done a really good job generating demand, you've taught them, you've shown them, and now you've become the category leader for them, so they come to you on their own. And for me, that's where the other concept comes in, lead generation, right? When the user doesn't come to you, you have to push them, and we do that through lead generation. Exactly. So that's where we need to differentiate these two paths. One is to teach and show them, and the other is, come on, you already know me, buy from me. And that's where everything we talked about regarding lead generation begins.
Although when you talk about pushing, for me, it's more about making it really easy for this person to start a sales process with me. And for example, the easiest thing to think of when it comes to purchases is a form on a landing page, right? But let's say we have an unknown buyer who has been listening to the podcast, who has read the articles, who already wants to get the products and the features we're selling in our furniture, but hasn't reached out. We don't know who this person is in the company. One day, they come to our website and call the phone number. We have no idea where they came from. The action there was to make contact, right? But then for me, lead capture or demand capture in this case would simply mean making it easy for them to contact us so that it goes directly to sales and they can start their, what I call perhaps incorrectly, the sales funnel. Because then we have a marketing funnel, a sales funnel, and then an onboarding funnel in business to business. And that's where silos appear in business to business, which is another big problem we could discuss another time. Yes.
I think this already gives us enough material for another episode. But going back a bit to what you just said, which I think is where I say the user can take two paths. The first path is that they go off on their own to search, which you just mentioned. And maybe that's something we can discuss in another episode, talking about this dark social, right? How a lead arrives that we can't measure, that we can't qualify. That's hard to see how it got here. There are tactics, we could talk about that. And the other group is the one that was guided through our lead generation process by advertising. This was because our systems were already tracking their online activities, and we then started directing them to the specific form that you mentioned. So lead generation is, in essence, a specialized advertising strategy, where the primary objective is to successfully get the potential user to come through various different channels, which have previously allowed us to carefully segment them and ultimately guide them along the path toward making a purchase.
Yes, although when you talk about pushing them, I actually think what we're really looking for are signals that tell us the perfect moment to say to sales, hey sales, I have a hot lead. Call them right now because it's very likely to turn into a sale. Why? What's happening today in BI? Nobody wants to fill out the form. Nobody wants to go through that process that marketers still insist on so much. Like, yo, you can't download my ebook until you give me your email. But now it's about finding the signals that tell me the person is open to being contacted by a sales rep, because I think we've all either done it or downloaded the ebook using a fake email, the one we never check.
That's where we say the B2B lead is running away from funnels, running away from forms, running away from leaving their information. They want to be more independent. They want to find the information themselves and then reach out on their own, or maybe get a little nudge from us when they're already at a pretty advanced stage of awareness. I think that's basically what we're trying to do. But anyway, I have a suggestion for you, Nico.
Let's wrap this up and move on to the main course. What do you think? How would you define this in basic terms so we can move forward?
Well, I would go back to Jora's point. He was telling us in this example about furniture that demand generation would be everything that creates interest, or rather first the need. So how do you create the need for furniture? For example, ergonomic furniture, or the importance of having ergonomic furniture in your company, right? That would be what creates that need for me. Then comes the interest in my brand. In other words, these pieces of furniture I sell are amazing because they have these features. All of that, which I can do through podcasts, through content on LinkedIn for me, is everything that would fall under demand generation. Now, within my funnel, I could have lead generation, or I could have a campaign focused solely on lead generation, which is completely different because it's about taking the user directly to a purchase, and that's where we tell the user directly, buy my furniture, I'll take you to the e-commerce site, I'll connect you with a consultant. At that point, it becomes lead generation, at that moment when I use ads to drive them there.
And that's why I prefer the terms demand generation and demand capture. They make more sense to me. Demand generation is about creating demand, and capture is like going fishing, casting the net and catching them when they're already ready to start the buying process.
All right, Nico. So now what?
I've got a story for you, my friend.
Okay, tell me.
To help illustrate this point and allow us to understand the topic more deeply, let me give you an example. Look, we currently have a client who initially came to us for what's known as lead capture, or as it's also called, lead generation. They had an annual budget they wanted to use in Latin America. So we helped them manage campaigns on LinkedIn, Google, Meta, and Twitter at that time. And this has produced very good results. Basically, compared to what they were spending, we achieved a 74% reduction in cost per lead. But
Wait, pure lead generation? You mean
just leads. Yes, demand capture, meaning search ads. In what we did on LinkedIn and Meta was remarketing.
okay?
So you would mostly come in through Google, searching for something, land on a landing page, and then through remarketing on these social networks, we would follow up with you until you converted and then scheduled a meeting with sales or something like that. That was basically their funnel. Well, we got these good results, achieved that optimization, which meant savings of almost $2.5 million. And that's when a new option opened up. They reduced
Cost per lead.
the cost per lead went down, but the quality didn't decrease. In fact, the quality even improved. Well, we did a lot of things that I can tell you about later about how we achieved it. But what I wanted to say is that we started with lead capture, capturing leads, and once we delivered results and they were happy with that, a budget was opened up with the same optimizations we had done, and they asked us, well, what else can we do? And that's when we rolled out our demand generation strategies. So at that point, we suggested writing some SEO articles, we proposed improving their customer service, and we recommended advertising on a specialized platform for business-to-business buyers, these kinds of strategies. And what do I think about this, and why did I bring it up? I feel that if we had started with demand generation strategies from the beginning, I don't think we would have achieved that immediate success with the client or built such a good relationship. So the conclusion and the lesson I take from this is that normally, and just as the world works today, we need leads to pass on to the sales team, and a sales team or a marketing director can't wait 6 months for us to bring in the first leads. Okay?
So what you're essentially saying is that if demand generation had come before lead generation, the ultimate results wouldn't have been precisely the same for that specific client.
For the client and for the relationship with the agency, because how can they measure us? Our
Measurement is based on revenue.
And that's the pain point. And it's what I see as the problem for marketing directors when it comes to requesting budgets for brand building strategies. I think many will understand that pain of how can I argue that building the brand is important without having my idea shot down? Because people believe that brand building doesn't bring in revenue.
If that is not the case, demand generation makes it substantially more difficult to bring in revenue. Or
It actually takes longer.
it takes longer, first of all, because it's not instantaneous. I mean, if you're going to create a LinkedIn profile where the CMO is going to be, let's say, the head of content, and you're going to create a podcast and start talking about a need within your industry, right? Generating demand is going to take some time for that person to become established. It could take years in
B2B,
depending on your strategy, but it can take quite a while. And if a sale does happen, that's the first point. It takes a long time. And the second point is, how do you attribute it? I mean, it's very hard to attribute. A sale is difficult to attribute to demand generation.
Yes, basically, the only really good way we found to do that is by asking the lead once they've become a client. Hi, how did you hear about us?
Exactly. Have a form or tell the salespeople, look, when you talk to them, ask how they heard about us. And very likely, and it's happened to us, they'll say, oh, I've been listening to your podcast for 3 months, or I follow the articles you post and I think they're great, right? When it becomes a reference for us, let's say we can already say this is working and we can measure it, meaning this client came through these demand generation actions, but it's complicated, right? So let's say that's the first difficulty we encounter when doing demand generation. Let's say with lead generation, you can be more certain, so to speak, because you're going to have some leads. But what happens? I think when these leads come in, the quality is very variable. It's very variable because that uses awareness of my brand, right? It might not be the best because they don't know me, because maybe they came in really cold, or the person
Was just looking for office furniture.
Exactly, they landed.
First try.
Exactly. They arrived without really knowing if it was the brand or the company that's the market leader, the one that will truly solve my needs with quality, with a number of things that are done more from the demand generation side.
And here's another very important point about demand generation. It could be that this Google search for office furniture just means the person is only looking for the other two companies they need to get quotes from.
Exactly.
And it's not like it's just that person was already motivated to search because someone had, let's say, been planting the idea in their mind about the need. And those were the ones who were actually doing demand generation.
Nico, let me tell you something. Only 3% of B2B purchases are impulsive. And look, it makes perfect sense because a purchasing manager at a company, they depend on an entire purchasing committee. They can't make an impulsive decision.
Unless they're the CEO at a super
small company, impulsive. And secondly, this person needs to have knowledge about the company they're going to buy from, warranties, how long they've been in the market, and also a pretty deep understanding of the product and service.
Right? And you know what else I've seen many times? That purchasing decision can cost you your reputation, your job, and that's very common. And I think that's where the emotional component of B2B comes in. Well, I don't want to get off topic, but I think that's an excellent conclusion. I think I'm in that 3% of impulsive B2B buyers.
I think you are. Myths, Nico, myths. False. True. The process of demand capture or lead generation, which are essentially two terms for the same concept, plays a very important role in helping to build your brand positioning. False. True.
True.
Why? Why? And why do you think this can help with brand positioning?
I think that if you run a well-executed campaign, if you have your brand pillars clear, your unique value proposition, and you address the customer's pain points, a good copy. Yes. And in the end, the customer has a good experience. Then you do some retargeting. Well, let's say they become a customer. At that point, you're building your brand. You've gained a customer. You're growing your business. So I believe that wherever your logo appears, it's an opportunity to either build or damage your brand.
However, we are all in agreement that when it comes to the important task of positioning the brand, it is ultimately more effective to leverage demand generation rather than simply relying on lead generation.
Yes, I also think that's true. Well, that's another myth.
I'm not saying you're wrong. But at the same time, if my main objective is to position the brand, it's not going to be a campaign. That's not the main goal.
Exactly.
It helps, but it's not the main objective.
I agree.
Perfect. Myth number 2. Well, demand generation can't be measured in terms of revenue. False, false, true.
False.
False?
It can't be. False?
Yes, of course. It can be measured in terms of the overall revenue. For example, if you run a demand campaign,
I think it can be measured in terms of revenue. And
how do you do it? Because the question is how. Because
by interviewing your clients. If you have, let's say, a podcast, and after a year, 20% of your clients tell you that they originally found you because they listened to your podcast, well, to me, that's a way of measuring revenue.
I absolutely agree. Because if we can indeed measure it, and this is crucial since the hardest part of demand generation is the measurement, something we both agree on, and we're drawing conclusions from that. But if we do manage to measure it, one of the key methodologies we've been using is to ask the client directly. We do this once they convert, or even earlier when the lead first comes in. We can then ask a simple question to understand how we can attribute their arrival, whether it was due to the podcast, our company blog, or a specific ad campaign they encountered, right? So we can see that because sometimes, well, here we also get into a very murky area, which is the topic of dark social. And as we said, that's something we could discuss in another episode. It's like everything starts to get mixed together. Because if I have paid ads, but I also have a podcast, for example, I have a podcast and I run ads, and maybe the user ended up converting through an ad, and I say, the lead came to me through an ad, right? But what if the first click actually came from the podcast? Exactly. So it's like that.
But I do think it's very important not to fall into the trap of metrics there, where you're trying to measure or attribute every single thing. Well, that's really it, just trying to measure for the sake of measuring. But in practice, I would say you should be looking at your revenue, your clients, and ultimately what you are actually billing for at the end of the day, because I think that's the fundamental thing you really want to optimize. Isn't that right? Of course.
But what we really want is to see that a podcast for a B2B client can end up being a high cost, right? Versus a lead generation campaign, a landing page, some campaigns. In other words, what we ultimately have to define is
an immediate cost, but how much?
But what's truly important is determining which cost, whether it's option A or option B, generates more meetings for me. Because in the end, that's what works best for me.
What does the data say? What does the data say? That short-term strategies give you a boost in the short run, but in the end, If you look at it over the course of years, long-term strategies end up delivering better results because if they gain momentum, they can become something exponential at zero cost, right? However, for lead generation campaigns that utilize paid advertisements where you are required to pay for them to be displayed, their success will always depend on your budget. So, well, I don't have the study here, but that's what is known. For those watching, I'll put the image up there.
Right? We agree. We agree that when you have a long-term campaign, basically the conversion rate is going to be higher. And we've already been talking about this because there's greater awareness of the product, the company, and so on. And I think we're already going on too long with this question, with this myth. Let's finish with the third one. But, well, I think this topic is...
But what was it? What were we answering? What was the second myth again? Let's see.
The second one is about revenue in relation to demand generation, whether it can be
Measured.
and that gives us enough to talk about another much bigger topic as well, because demand generation is a huge world that already takes us. Dark social leads us to strategies, well,
SEO.
and how LinkedIn is used in this whole process. And in the end, how can we measure this? And that's quite a robust topic. But anyway, let's move on to the third point. So a very important question to consider is this. Should forms be actively used for demand generation, or on the other hand, should they not be used?
False. True.
False. True. Let's say the myth would be
False. I say go. False.
if it's a good practice, let's say it's not a good practice.
I'm going to argue, I think it has to make sense. For example, if I'm doing an educational newsletter as part of demand generation strategies, and let's say going back to the furniture example, I create a newsletter about good posture in the workplace, I get a lead, but we're not going to pass that on to sales, right?
We call that a content lead.
At this stage, we simply don't have enough of the necessary trust, attention, desire, or interest for any meaningful action to occur. Therefore, we must patiently wait until the person is genuinely ready to move forward, because as we've previously established, today's B2B buyer does not want to be pushed into sales funnels they haven't explicitly asked to be a part of.
So to be perfectly clear, we don't really need to collect that kind of detailed data at this initial stage of the funnel. I mean, it's important to understand that here, at the very top of the funnel, we don't require the lead's personal data simply because there's no demonstrated buying interest from them yet. What we are actually doing is focusing our efforts on generating genuine user interest and building brand awareness so that they will eventually recognize our company as the clear category leader. But to be explicit, we are not looking to get their contact information for the purpose of passing it on to the sales team. It's simply not the right time for that step. So what we're doing with this form, and we've thought about this many times, is that either people don't leave their information, or if they do, it's fake and not correct. So sales calls and they say, this person doesn't answer, or a kid answered the phone. And why do
People leave fake information.
Because they don't want to leave their information, because they don't want anything commercial, they don't want to be called, they don't want any of that. They just want to see that content because it seemed interesting to them.
And
We're putting up this barrier on our content, and our users aren't watching our content because we're putting up a barrier thinking that having that data is going to help us somehow.
I think this happens because in the end, the person behind the marketing director needs to show something quantifiable in terms of results to say
So many.
leads, but those,
Your leads are simply not generating any value.
of course. So that's where I talk about the trap of the metric. Sure, your leads look great, but how much have we actually sold? That's why I'm so firm in saying that if you're not actually selling, then nothing happens, nothing matters. It's as if you hadn't done anything at all.
And here's the big question. Where are my leads? Bite up time, Nico. In this section, we have 8 questions that have been selected by the production team, questions we've been asked on social media. The idea is to spin this lottery ball, draw a random number, and answer the question that comes up. We have 30 seconds to respond. Okay, ready. So we have to be very quick. All right, let's get started. All right, number 6. Number 6, I sell construction supplies in different countries. What strategy would you recommend for generating quality leads in the business-to-business sector? All right, Nico, 30 seconds.
The first thing you need to do is really get to know your client. Who is your target audience? What are their pain points? There must be a purchasing committee. You need to find out who they are and not just write down demographic information, but also what interests them and what their pain points are in B2B. Then you create a Google search campaign focused on keywords with purchase intent.
Okay? I would complement that with a demand generation campaign on LinkedIn to position yourself for the long term. Next poll. Well, what's important here are the answers. That's what matters. Nicholas, 30 seconds. Well, is LinkedIn ads more efficient for demand generation or for lead generation? 30 seconds.
I think it's more for demand generation. Why?
Agreed, demand generation. Because LinkedIn ads for lead generation is very expensive, and getting leads cold like that isn't very efficient and hasn't given us very good revenue. I think it's a...
For example, on LinkedIn, you can get those leads we were just talking about who aren't ready to buy yet, and that's why it's demand generation.
Dem gen.
Agreed.
Last question, number 3. All right. Okay, here's the next question. A marketing director from an industrial supply company asks us, I want to start generating demand for my company. What are the best tactics you could recommend? All right, 30 seconds. I'll start. It's hard to answer this question because until you do a really clear analysis of your audience's needs, and there's another very important point here, which is that I need to know which channels my buyer persona is on, and that's key. But let's say, assuming a lot of things, we could say that LinkedIn is a good tool to generate demand through short 30-second videos?
Yes, and I would also add a clearer positioning strategy, specifically with a blog that features our own content. But the